So for this lesson, we are going to kind of go smaller, more local. Last lesson, we looked at some federal cases talking about equity in education. What I want to do now is look at educational equity and legal precedents, specifically in the state of Arizona. So we're going to look at some key cases, policies, and some Native American curriculum as far as like what federal has kind of trickled down to the state of Arizona. So if I can get my PowerPoint to advance for you guys. There we go. All right. So what is educational equity? And we've gone over this so much in this course, so hopefully you know what that is. But basically, it's the principle that all students, regardless of their background, receive the specific support and resources they need to succeed and reach their full potential. This was that picture that we showed of the boxes where equality, everyone had the same box. Equity is, if you can already see over the fence, you don't need the box. If you or one box doesn't work for you and you need two boxes, then that's equity. That's giving all the support that you need across the board, right? So we're also going to look at how these legal precedents have shaped fairness and opportunity in the state of Arizona. So the main things that we're looking at for this lesson, we're going to look at English language learners, funding, facilities, diversity, and Native American education. I just want to point out that Arizona state constitution, it creates a separate enforceable duty on the state to provide a general and uniform public school system. So we do see some federal laws that have helped shape the state of Arizona's constitution and how that from the federal standpoint has matriculated down to the state level. Okay, these are again major court cases. You already know about these. Let me just move myself out of the way here if I can. So I also want to give you a map, just kind of showing you where these court cases came from. So they started out at the state level, and then the states kicked them up to the Supreme Court. So you've got Brown versus Board. That was the huge monumental case that ended racial segregation in schools across the United States, and that came out of Kansas. So if you go Texas, Oklahoma, there's Kansas for you in this area. We talked about Lau versus Nichols. Schools must provide language support for non-English speaking students. Remember, that came from the Chinese students that had immigrated into California. So that comes out of the state of California, which is Arizona's neighbor. And then this final court case is Plyler versus Doe. And this came out of Texas, and this is a picture from that. This came out of like East Texas, this town called Tyler, Texas. Basically, it stated that states cannot deny education to undocumented students in the state of Texas. So the main issue for all of these court cases is the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and the argument was that all of these instances violated that Equal Protection Clause. You may not know the Equal Protection Clause because if you don't study history or you don't study political science, that's not like really a thing that we look at. The biggest thing that came out of the 14th Amendment is it pretty much defined who is and is not a citizen. You have to remember going back a couple of decades before this law came, or before this amendment was added. This was added in the 1860s. So before that amendment was added, African Americans who were not slaves, who had been like either born free or had earned their freedom, were not considered U.S. citizens. So what the 14th Amendment did is it made sure that they were considered citizens upon their, the end of slavery. And it also gave, it defined citizens, and that was the big deal. Like it defined them as male. Had whole controversy over that, but that's for a different lesson. But then also there's equal protection. Basically, once you step foot on American soil, it doesn't matter how you got there. If you got there legally or illegally, you are guaranteed protection under the Constitution. And that's what that court case was arguing with Plyler versus Doe. Like, it doesn't matter if you're undocumented. You still get the same educational opportunities because it's guaranteed to you under the U.S. Constitution. So that's where that's coming from. So let's look at some court cases that pertain specifically to Arizona. So I want to look at Choswell versus Hollins. This is 1973. So the issue in this court case is, or was, does funding disparities between school districts violate equal protection under the Arizona Constitution? The ruling came back and said education in the state of Arizona is a fundamental right under the Arizona state constitution, but the state's funding system at the time was upheld under rational basis review. So basically, yeah, there are disparities, and we know that there are, but I'm not going to do too much about it. So the relevance for this is it does lay the foundation for later challenges to inequitable school funding. And it recognized education as a right, giving later plaintiffs a constitutional basis for reform to kind of spread funding around more equally so that every school kind of has the same funding opportunities. Another court case that came out in the 90s is Roosevelt Elementary School District versus Bishop. The issue in this court case was Arizona's school financing system was unconstitutional under the General and Uniform Clause. Was it? So the ruling was, yeah, it is. The system that relied heavily on local property taxes violated the Arizona Constitution because it led to gross disparities in school quality. So basically it's stating if you live in Scottsdale where prices are higher, a lot of funding for education comes from property taxes and from local tax. So it's a higher tax base, like you've got more wealth if you live in Scottsdale compared to if you live like out where I live in El Mirage. Our schools are not as nice. Our schools are not as high tech because the property taxes there are much lower. The cost of living there is lower than it is in Scottsdale. So the schools compared those two places, you compare one in Scottsdale and one in El Mirage, the Scottsdale schools are going to be better because they have more funding. And so it showed that, yeah, there are these disparities. And the relevance of Roosevelt versus Bishop is it established the principle that all Arizona students are entitled to substantially equal access to adequate educational resources. And finally, our big case pertaining to educational quality that's going to help set precedents is Hull versus Albrecht. And during this case, so the issue was, did the legislators post-Roosevelt funding reforms meet constitutional requirements? And the ruling was no. The court held that the new measures still failed to ensure uniformity and adequacy in facilities funding. So the relevance for this one is it reinforced the state's obligation to equalize capital funding and ensure all schools can meet state standards. So again, with the funding models that we have and who gets what and who gets more money, it's still not equally distributed. There's still the have and the have-nots when it comes to public education in the state of Arizona. Okay, we're going to look at some court cases now that deal specifically with English language learners, their education and equity, and then some facilities and funding. We've kind of already gone over facilities and funding, but I want to look at Flores versus Arizona. So this is critical because the issue is, did Arizona fail to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers under the Equal Educational Opportunities Act, the EEOA? We went over this the last session, the last module that we had. So I just put it up there again for you just so that you can remember what it is. The Equal Educational Opportunities Act came out in the 70s, is a federal law that requires school districts to take action to overcome language barriers and to ensure equal access to education for students with limited English proficiency. So the ruling was for this Flores versus Arizona. Initially, federal courts found Arizona in violation for underfunding English language learner programs. And the Supreme Court later emphasized changed conditions, but left EEO obligations intact. So what's the relevance of this court case? Well, it defines how Arizona must fund and support English language learner programs to ensure language is not a barrier to equal educational access. Then we have our Roosevelt and Hull cases. Those set the standard for equitable facilities, but you're going to notice there's ongoing lawsuits, even in the 2020s, that are still challenging this inadequate state maintenance funding. I already said, it's not equal across the board, right? So educational equity includes physical environments that support learning. So if you walk into a school building and you have whiteboards and no other technology, is that the same as the students who get free Chromebook at the beginning of the school year? No. The physical environments, like, is the classroom safe? Is it free of mold? Is it a safe environment for them to go into? If that's not withheld upon all of these schools across the board, then it's not equitable. It's not the same. Let's look at Native American curriculum just really quickly in Native American education, because it's such a big deal here in the state of Arizona with our 22 tribes. So you've got Native American Language Act of 1990. This was a U.S. policy to preserve, protect, and promote the rights and freedom of Native Americans to use, practice, and develop Native American languages. So that's what the law states. Indian self-determination education assistance basically allows tribes significantly more control over their educational programs. So when they are talking about on the reservations or schools that are primarily for Native students, they are in control and they have the ability to contract or manage schools and educational services on their own. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act, what this and the provisions for Native and Alaskan children, it just identifies eligible entities for federal programs serving Native American and Native Alaskan children. So in Arizona, there's no laws specifically for Arizona. You have these are coming from the federal level and kind of trickling down to Arizona. So in Arizona, they're encouraged through partnerships and tribal consultation, but there's no formal statewide mandate yet when it comes to Native American curriculum. So what are the core legal themes that we're seeing throughout these local court cases? So education is a right. It's a fundamental right, and it says so in our state constitution. Uniform and adequate funding, which we still have issues with. We're still not quite there yet. We still have lawsuits going on in the 2020s. Language access and ELL rights. So currently we still have those in place, but we'll see what federal administrations do for those. Equal protection for all students. This is guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution. It's going to take a constitutional amendment to revoke those. So those are not going away. And then also cultural and linguistic inclusion, so Native-focused acts and policies that will help with students, and our ELL policies also help with students. So now what I want you to look at is to go through, and we do have an assignment for this lesson. It's easy, it's not hard. You can find this in Canvas, but what you're going to do is, after reviewing the PowerPoint, and I'm going to have a list of all the court cases that I went over, plus a couple of extra ones that I didn't go over, but still kind of pertain to Arizona. But I want you to summarize what it established and its impact on Arizona education today. Explain how this precedent connects to the concept of educational equity. And then what more could Arizona do to ensure equal educational opportunities for all students, including Native American students and English language learning students? So that's your assignment. Check it out in Canvas. There's more instructions and details for you in Canvas.